Year 166. For generations, its victories had seemed to prove that the gods favored the empire. Roman armies had crossed mountains, rivers, and deserts. Their standards had entered cities whose inhabitants once believed Rome could never reach them. Now soldiers were returning from war in the east. They brought captured wealth, stories of victory, and, somewhere among the marching columns, an unseen enemy. One man developed a fever, then another. Soon the sick were appearing far beyond the army camps. The disease moved along the same roads, ports, and supply routes that held the empire together. Rome had built the ancient world's greatest network for moving soldiers and information. It could also move contagion. The outbreak, later called the Antonine Plague, had begun. To understand what happened next, we must enter a world in which religion was not confined to a weekly service or a private statement of belief. The gods were present in the home, at the crossroads, inside the army, in the marketplace, and at the heart of government. At dawn, a Roman household might place wine, incense, or food before its protective spirits. These household gods watched over the family, the storeroom, and the continuity of the home. Beyond the doorway stood the public gods of Rome: Jupiter, Juno, Minerva, Mars, Vesta, and many others. Their temples dominated civic space, but the building itself was not primarily a hall for a congregation. It housed the gods' image and treasure. Much of Roman ritual happened outside, where citizens could watch a procession or sacrifice. The exchange was understood in practical terms. The community honored the gods correctly. The gods preserved the community. Religion, citizenship, and public order were therefore difficult to separate. But Rome did not worship with one voice. The empire absorbed peoples, languages, and deities from across the Mediterranean and beyond. A merchant might pray to the Egyptian goddess Isis. A soldier stationed on a distant frontier might enter an underground sanctuary devoted to Mithras. Local gods in Gaul, Syria, Africa, and Britain continued to be worshipped, sometimes under Roman names and sometimes beside them. In the 2nd century, the cult of Isis was near the height of its popularity. Its initiates sought a more personal relationship with the divine and hope beyond death. Mithraic worship offered secrecy, initiation, and brotherhood. Its small, cave-like sanctuaries were especially common where soldiers served. What happened inside was not advertised to the street. Rome could tolerate remarkable religious variety. The central question was usually not whether a foreign god existed, but whether its worship threatened public order, and whether its followers would still honor the obligations Rome demanded. Jewish communities had lived throughout the Roman world for generations. They worshipped one God, maintained their scriptures and customs, and refused the worship of Roman deities. Their position was ancient, visible, and legally complicated. Only a few decades before the plague, the Bar Kokhba revolt had ended in catastrophe in Judea. Roman forces crushed the rebellion between 132 and 135. Jerusalem was refounded as a Roman colony, and the memory of resistance remained close. For Jewish communities, Genesis was already ancient scripture, the story of creation, covenant, exile, and belonging. For Rome, Judaism was both an old religion and a reminder that faith could become inseparable from identity, law, and rebellion. Christians also worshipped the God of Israel, but by the middle of the 2nd century, their communities were becoming increasingly distinct from Judaism. They met in homes and other private spaces. They shared meals, prayed, cared for one another, read Jewish scripture, and circulated writings associated with apostles and teachers. There was not yet a universally fixed New Testament in the form later Christians would recognize. Different communities possessed different collections, and arguments over authority and belief were already underway. To Roman observers, the movement could appear secretive and stubborn. Christians would not sacrifice to Rome's gods. They would not treat the emperor as divine. When accused, they could be required to demonstrate loyalty through an act of worship they believed they could not perform. This did not produce one continuous, empire-wide persecution under Marcus Aurelius. Enforcement was often local, inconsistent, and shaped by governors, accusations, and public pressure. But the danger was real. In Rome, the Christian philosopher Justin was tried and executed during this period. In the cities of Lyon and Vienne, Christians would later be imprisoned and killed during Marcus's reign. The surviving evidence does not allow us to turn Marcus into the author of a simple extermination policy. It does show that the philosophical emperor ruled a system in which Christians could die for refusing Rome's religious demands. Then, disease entered the argument. The physician Galen observed the epidemic and recorded symptoms, including fever and a widespread eruption of the skin. Modern scholars often suspect smallpox, though certainty is impossible. The effects reached far beyond the sick room. Farms lost workers. Military recruitment became more difficult. Trade, taxation, and food supply were strained. In the streets, practical measures mixed with ritual responses. Families sought physicians, medicines, charms, prayers, sacrifices, and any rumor that promised protection. Priests continued the ceremonies through which Rome had always negotiated with the divine. But every funeral raised the same unspoken question. If the rites had been performed, why were the gods not protecting Rome? Some Romans looked for religious explanations. Groups that refused public sacrifice could be blamed for offending the gods. In a frightened society, refusal might look less like private conscience and more like sabotage. That does not mean every victim blamed Christians, or that every Christian behaved heroically. It means epidemic fear made an already vulnerable minority easier to suspect. Marcus Aurelius was not watching from a quiet library. His reign was marked by war, disease, political strain, and repeated demands on the empire's resources. He served as emperor, military commander, chief priest, judge, and symbol of Roman order. The same man who reminded himself that human beings were made for cooperation also inhabited a religious and political system built upon sacrifice, hierarchy, slavery, and imperial power. This is what makes the period more revealing than a simple contest between a wise Stoic and a new faith. Marcus did not rule a modern secular state. Christianity did not yet possess imperial churches. Judaism carried the wounds of revolt. Mystery cults promised belonging and salvation. Traditional rites still bound family, army, and government together. Everyone was asking how the divine world touched the human one. They did not agree on the answer. Rome survived the plague. The old temples remained open. Sacrifices continued. Christians remained a minority, and no observer in 166 could confidently predict that their faith would one day transform the empire. Yet the crisis exposed a change already in progress. The question was no longer merely which god protected a city or granted victory. People were also asking what happened after death, what loyalty required, whether suffering had meaning, and whether truth could demand resistance to the state. In the reign of Marcus Aurelius, Rome still appeared to possess the world. But within its homes, sanctuaries, barracks, synagogues, and hidden gatherings, people were imagining different worlds to come. The gods had not fallen silent. Rome had become crowded with competing answers. If you want more journeys into the real world behind Stoic philosophy, subscribe to The Stoic Archive, share this documentary, and turn on notifications for the next chapter.